All right, friends, thanks for joining another interview. This is Jason Stone, and I sit down with Logos users from all around the world now and get to hear how they use the software. And today is a guest who, like I just mentioned to Joe a moment ago, I've actually been following his writing and his work kind of like in the back of my mind as I've been learning about Logos over the years. So he's been at it longer than I have, and he's been in the software longer than I have and training others and sharing his knowledge of the application with others. So it's really cool. I get to circle back and see what he's been up to since then. So, Joe, say hello and greet everybody who's tuning into the replay. Thanks for being here, Joe.
Hey, Jason, thank you for having me here, and I'm glad to help your viewers any way I can. I've been using this tool for forever. You want to know a fun story, background story on this? When I
Let's
started,
go. Yeah.
so actually, when I was in seminary in the mid 1990s, this is going way back. I'm dating myself, and I bought this piece of software. It's like on a CD ROM for the young kids. That's a piece of plastic that's a circle that looks like this. And it was a Dallas Word. It had 40 books on it, and you could do some Greek, and it was in old DOS format for the young kids. That's before there was Windows, and so you could install this thing. I had it probably like a month, and within a month, I get this email: "Hey, we're this company called Logos Bible Software. We just bought out this Dallas Word thing. Here's 1.0 of our software. You can use it in the Windows format." And so I started using this thing for its seminary, doing some Greek and Hebrew stuff when there was some decent tools back then. It was all right. And then just gone on since then. And I just started using it for preaching and teaching for academics for a while there for 5 minutes or so. I used to work for Lagos as a regional rep, and I used to do a lot of training. I produced a bunch of videos over the years, and I used to do all kinds of stuff and go to different seminaries and train and Greek and all to use all kinds of research stuff. I've been out of the game for a while, but for Jason, for you, I came
Coming out of
back because I saw
retirement.
your stuff and I thought, okay, I'll do it. I'll risk it. I'm going to be a little bit rusty, but I will
I
gladly
mean,
show you what it is because I got some free tools for sermon prep that I just so helpful for me when I do my stuff that I just felt like, okay, I'm going to at least introduce people to it because maybe it'll help some out.
that's awesome. Oh, that's really cool. That's great context too for anyone who's watching the replay. I've got an expert sitting with me. I'm just saying, Joe. What can I ask you a random question? I'll put you on the spot, and you might say, I don't know. Do you remember a university or a pastor or a situation where you were really excited to train and teach or share logos with someone, maybe someone from around the world or someone at a particular university or pastorate?
Man, the training I used to do, actually, on the stuff, the reason I kind of picked on today, the five
Mm.
days to better sermon prep stuff, is when I was in San Diego last. I'm at Grand Canyon University right now. I teach. I'm a full-time professor here. I'm assistant professor at Christian Worldview. Work with young people, so I'm not doing the training for pastors, and I'm not doing the weekly sermon prep either, as I was. But when I was in San Diego and I was church planting and teaching, but I still was working on sermon prep on a weekly basis, and so I do some training for local pastors, and just giving them access to Logos in a way that they could manage without getting overwhelmed with all the tools that are just like fire hose kind of thing and not even
Hmm.
knowing when to use it. It's one thing to know there is a tool. It's like, when do I use it and how do I use it? So, sitting down with a lot were lay pastors, just sort of, this was not even their full-time gig, but they just were, and trying to teach them to use this tool because when their lives are busy, man, how do you do the prep and how do you do it well? And so when the lights turn on and you're working with,
I know.
some pastors doing that, those are the best times. Those are the best
Hmm.
things I did. I mean, I like working I've done some training in seminaries and that's fun. They're a little more geeking out and they're into
Yeah,
it, but helping the busy pastor kind of prep
so
and
cool.
figure that in so they can do good stuff and not have to cheat off somebody else's pre-made sermons and drive me insane. But those are the best moments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like that's like all the fun. And then the YouTube comments or the blog post comments or the
Yeah.
people that email and they're just like, this is it finally like makes sense. And you said the word contextualize. And so as before we tee up you sharing your screen and me putting you in the hot seat and then what we're actually going to focus on today, that contextualized training I think is so important. Like I think that sometimes you'll sit down, you'll either read a support article, you'll watch a YouTube video or something like that, and it's just like, here's all the tools. But I wanted to point out for anybody who's watching the replay prior to us going and starting our recording, Joe mentioned I just really enjoy contextualizing the application to use cases. And so today we're going to be focusing on sermon prep. And so it's not necessarily, these are all the features within the sermon builder, or this is how the sermon manager works and how the wheel looks so pretty. Instead, it's like, how do you actually prepare a sermon, and taking that use case and walking it through. So did you want to add anything to that, Joe?
Yeah, just the idea that the way I learn, the way I think it makes more sense is to get people just want to say, okay, I just want to make a Bible study. I just want to make a sermon, right? They don't care
Hmm.
about how to use any tools. They just want
Hmm.
to get the product out, right? And so when I started to do the training years ago, that's what I had in mind. It's like, what's the end product and how do I get there? And so, yeah, this was a step-by-step thing. And I used to just do it all. I used to have to before Logos had these sort of customizable layouts that you could create and workspaces and all this other kind of stuff. It was a lot. I mean, it was still difficult for
Yeah.
most people couldn't wrap their head around because there were so many steps. So when I built this template for 5 days to better sermon prep, I could build everything into the template. So all the links, all the tools, when you use them, all come into play. And what I've found is that most people, even if they're not super tech savvy, or if they easily get overwhelmed with the Logos feature set, it made it so much more doable because all they had to do is click the button, fill in the box, click the button, fill in the box,
Hmm.
open up and it would take care of a lot of that for them. So it really helps.
Sweet. That's great. Are we going to get into some of that today?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
as much as I can. And just bear with me because I haven't done this a long time. So I tried to run through this to make sure I could like do this
Um,
somewhat
I,
smoothly. But if I glitch out,
I
you
feel
just
like the
ask
two
me.
of us, I feel like we could tackle it together. I feel like we can get through it. So when you're ready, if you're ready,
All right,
you can
I
take the
will
screen.
share my screen.
And as you do that, why don't you set up for after you get the screen shared, set up today what we'll be covering. Yeah, I could see it. Great. Looks good.
Okay, so here's the home screen. And what I want to say is, okay, how do I get a sermon made? And so Logos has some pre-made sermon layouts that you can use, different styles, different approaches. But for me, what was important is what was different when I was a full-time pastor. That was my only gig, and I was doing this, 40 hours, 50 hours, whatever it was a week that I'd work. My sermon prep was way different. But when I started church planting, and I did that a couple times, I didn't have the time to block out like, here's 5 hours on one day, or just because you have in those cases, I was bivocational intentionally because I wanted to be a bivocational planter. So I had to really reimagine my sermon planning stuff. So I built on some of the stuff from like Don Sanukian, his sermon preparation stuff. Haddon Robinson he studied on Haddon Robinson as well. So I took all that stuff. I tried to break it down to 5 days because 5 days I figured, hey, that's two less than Sunday because Sunday you can't prep. Maybe you get a day off or you need an extra day somewhere. So to just, oh, day was crazy and I had an emergency. So I wanted to do it all. How do we do it in 5 days? Maybe just a couple hours each day. And if I could do that, then I'm going to prep, right? So that was my goal. And that's what this came down to. So this can actually be downloaded from Logos. So if you go to the guides, you can go in and I think you've done a video on this. I think I saw where you can download guides. But if you go into the Logos system to download guides, I'm not even good at showing that anymore, but you can search for this option. I can even zoom here, 5 day
Nice.
planner for expository narrative sermons. So
And
that's
if
what you
anyone
search.
has, if you're watching and you have questions about how to get to that, once again, how to share or get to a shared document like that, just go ahead and ask in the comments and we'll make sure we point you there. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, it's really straightforward, but I don't remember how to do it off the top of my head. So it's been a few years. So yeah, so you can download this. It's freely accessible. It's all available. And when you click on this, it's just going to open up this 5 day sermon planner, and it tells about workflows, what they do. The cool part is what I've built in here. Everything is linked to different options where like if you click on it, it'll take you to some of the things we're talking about, like the videos that I'll use for training. So that's my Substack where I do all the training. What is biblical preaching? So you can learn if you're just starting out, here's the training. Again, so all those links I've built in. But here's what all you really do for this. So you take this out and you decide where you want to preach out of. So Genesis 1, and then you can do the smaller set or the whole thing, whatever verses you want to do. I want to pick one that's large enough here, so I want to just so I make sure I get enough stuff. So, all right, that'll
Great.
work. That's fine. So, if you've ever done any of these kind of guides before, these are pretty helpful. So, and maybe actually it would be helpful too if I laid out a little bit about my sermon prep. So, those 5 days, what they actually are. So, day one is going to be this idea of you're going to make some observations based on just reading the text. Just go and read through the whole thing. And then you're going to do a little bit of looking into some of the observations from some of the language. So you pull up certain like language or background. Language commentary is pretty much what I have to try to emphasize. And even if you're not a Greek or Hebrew scholar, Logos has some good tools for that. And so that's going to be day one. Day two is going to focus in on, matter of fact, let me, if you don't mind, I'll switch over to the
No,
biblical preaching thing here.
don't mind
This
at
is
all.
the actual whole thing here. And I lay it out here. Oops. Here we are. This one. See, okay, so this is about my workflow. So you can find it here. And I give an even instruction video there how to download it as well. But and how to set up some commentary. Some of the things that like I'll cover today, uh, but this is all covered. And so some of the things I'll skip over are here in
Great.
this process.
I'll make sure I add a
But
link to the video to
yeah,
your Substack.
okay. So just so people know, like I may cover over like again how to add it and how to create it, how to create book collections. I've got some of the ways I do collections there as well, and so some of that stuff is there. Anyway, so you'll go through these days. Each day has its own thing, so I can kind of take you through that pretty quickly though, and then you can pause me if I need
Great.
to explain
Yeah, it
something.
sounds great.
So the way I have it here is you just day one observation meeting. I explain it. In day one, your sermon preparation, you dig into the passage with a simple two-step process, observation, meaning, right? And if you ever want any more on things, I give tips along the way, how to avoid use of commentaries, especially on this day because it's not helpful. You should always do your pre-study of just the scripture without commentary. So there's a methodology involved with this. And my methodology, again, based on Haddon Robinson, Don Sanukian, very standard kind of stuff. I just built it basically into a Logos guide. But then here's the passage we're at. And if you want to do more, Logos is cool. It just opens up so you can read the whole context. This is the awesome thing about Logos there. So, all those are available. And then basically I just say, hey, take time to pray about the passage and ask yourself, what does God want? So you just start typing in whatever you want, all of your observations and all of your things, because Logos provides all these little tools. And then when you're ready, you just hit continue. And it takes you right to the next step. And you can see when Logos does these guides, you'll see your track your progress with these little dots along the way. Then observation 1.1, there's their goal, allow the passage to create a question and doubts. Time is, 15 to 30 minutes. So I even give the time frame for how
I
long you
like that
should
you
really
did
kind of
that.
do that.
That's really
Yeah,
that's really nice.
yeah. So, and then again, tips along the way, read with fresh eyes. So these are all things I've taught. Like I used to teach homiletics both at the doctoral level and a little bit at the grad level. So a lot of this I used to just teach in a classroom, and a lot of this is from my slides. I just incorporated into this work, into this guide, so that some of the key tips, some of the core ideas are there. And then here's again the more part where I say, well, hey, video, a 20-minute overview of the process of observation. So when you click that, you'll go right to my Substack, and you can watch this little video on how to do sermon preparation overview starting day one. So that's the kind of the benefit of using this deal is just as opposed to randomly watching a bunch of videos again, it's contextualized learning,
Mm-hmm.
right? You could literally step through this one day at a time. And the first couple times you could take longer to watch all the stuff. But then eventually when you get it, you don't need all those things and they just go away. All those tips are gone. So everything is about goal, time, studies, what you're going to read the passage. Again, there's more, there's tips all along the way. And then write down the questions you want to answer. Who is important in the passage? God, Adam and Eve. I'm not spell checking here. God should always be capitalized. So I'm not it's not apostasy. I'm just being lazy. So then you'll type into each what makes the most sense out of this passage. Where is this taking place? What is taking place? So I literally give you all the prompts what you'll need to do. And then when you're done, you fill in all those things. Now notice that 1.1 of observation is done. So now you got the
Mm-hmm.
green check mark, that thing is done. Now I'm on 1.2, meaning. Here's the goal. Allow the original languages of the text to both clarify and create more questions. How long is it going to take? Maybe 60 to 90 minutes. By the way, those time frames, I'm trying to be as generous as possible. Life gets busy, and sometimes if you're familiar with the passage, it could be way less. Sometimes it could be way more. It totally depends on some of your history and your teaching of the Bible, what your training education are. But again, tips along the way, how to use language, more video that's available for that. Here's what you're going to study. So you can see I put in all caps, like every day follows this goal, time, tips, and study. And so it's a very structured approach the whole way. And then this is the use of interesting. So the logos kind of pulls these things in here, the figure of language. There isn't any in this, right? So logos has these features that you can learn individually how to use. What I did was I embedded all of these tools where they're available. So in this case, there's none. I could have picked a better passage and they'd have had figurative language. Like say if you're in Jesus using a parable, it would explain what parables are. Or if you're doing poetry, it would have figured how these words of this passage might be used figuratively in certain phrases. Logos is going to help you kind of pull in these things, but they're going to be embedded right here. And if you ever want to open them up, it'll open it up in a separate window where you can actually just study that whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
So again, this is that contextualized learning piece where my workflow just incorporates all of these features, but only when you need them. And because I've already given you tips and videos, they should make sense as part of that contextualized learning.
And you don't
Then
have to
after you
remember
learn,
to go to your toolbox and you don't have to remember to go to your toolbox and then open figurative language or text
exactly.
comparison or whatever additional feature just to have floating around in your head. This
Yeah.
at least is all incorporated in one place. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the cool part too, because in the observation day, when you get to part like, oh, what's this figure of speech mean? You don't have to actually know it. You don't even have to right click, find it
Yeah.
out, because that distracts you from the prep part. That's why in observation day one, you're actually writing that down. Hey, in verse two, what does this mean? Why would God say
Hmm.
this? And wrestling with the question is actually the best part about Bible study and learning, not too quickly relying on a commentary or even the features that Logos has to help you wrestle with that. So that's a big part of the process of wrestling with these things and praying over them. God, why would you say this? Why would you inspire Moses to write it this way and in this order and that process? So this whole process that I've laid out in the guides then is really kind of helping not too quickly shortcut to the answer or to the answer that some other person said based on their study.
Yeah. You haven't even got to commentaries yet. So
Exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
And you won't touch them at all on day one. So again, how might this figure of speech in this passage be used to shape meaning in your own cultural context? So again, these questions. If you're not a language person, this is where I built in the verse river. So version river, if you're not familiar with Logos, it shows you where different translations will where they're most similar or where they're different. And so you can see here that I can pop it open here. It's going to give you like where all of your sticking points are. So in verse 26 right here is where you'll see that there's a lot of agreement. That's why these, I think it opened twice might be more confusing. So you can see where in this little part here, where in the center where it's zoomed in there, there's a lot of agreement. Different translations don't have a lot of variety of how they translate that. But here, you get some of the language might be very different. And why this can be useful is when you want to compare different versions along the way, even if you don't know Greek and Hebrew, you can see, well, you start to ask yourself, well, why does New King James use a different word set? And why does NLT and ESV why do they all disagree so much here? Why is there so much variety on this? And yet they all disagree here. So what you're starting to do is you're starting to figure out where is it down the road I'm going to try to use my commentaries or my language study tools to figure out is there a tricky Hebrew word or is it a culturally sort of misunderstood phrase or is it something that makes sense in the Hebrew or Greek but just not in English and that's why there's such a variety in these different translations. So this is where you're just going to write down which verses require the study of the original languages to better understand the English. So you're just noting that. You're just taking note of it, not getting sidetracked with the actual study. And then a word by word tool, again, this is if you really want to dig in at this point, you can start to at least look if you're familiar with the languages. If you're not, you can skip this part. Like this is again just looking at literally the language, every word that's used along these passages. This could be overwhelming again if you're not a language person, but if you
Do you
aren't,
have it set to every word, or do you have it set for an occurrence or anything?
I have this just set for all the verses that we did. So it's going to pick every verse that you did in this range.
Yeah.
So if we
Okay.
did a whole 5 or 10 verses, it would do this for every verse. So
Cool.
if I
Okay.
I can shrink it down here and
There you
maybe
go.
that's more
Yeah,
obvious.
but it's
Yeah.
still great. I mean, it's important
Yeah,
to
I
read
only
through.
did it by verse in this, and because again, it's at this point what my study is like, why is it that say in what am I trying to figure out in verse 26, or why is it the same, or why these other verses maybe there's more disagreement. And so I'm just trying to figure out, like, say it'll highlight, see how it has end over everything, and then it'll do this. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh yeah, okay, so you can see where when I highlight the word it's going to point out the Hebrew, so it'll
Hmm.
do that built into it. So which words have critical meaning in the text and impact the richness of your theological application. So that's where you're going to say, like, you don't have to pick the original language. You could just say, you could pick the English word. You know, you could subdue. Okay, well, I want to look at
Hmm.
subdue later on. So right now you're just trying to figure out what do I not know or what do I think is really interesting. Does that make
Cool.
sense?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So do the same with commentaries. Or I'm sorry, grammatical constructions. Logos has these tools that pick out, like, here's these sort of important phrasings that it'll pick out. Here's prepositional phrases. So Logos is going to pick out, here's objective lemma and prepositional. So depending on how much your background is this, you
That's
can
so
use
awesome.
this. And
Yeah.
so which of these grammatical constructions have the biggest impact on your understanding of the text? Tomorrow, you're going to study some good commentaries. What questions come up during your study today that you hope to answer tomorrow?
Yeah,
And
that's
so, my
great.
goal in this is I think what I found most important is that, like, what I do, fill in all these things and I'll put in my answers and I finish it off. And I print this out when I'm done because there's a way along us to print this out, and then I'll maybe, like, before I'd go to bed that night, I'd just skim over what questions that I need to ask because I like to sit with it for a day, or I go to work and I do my job, but it gives time to God, the Holy Spirit, to really help me wrestle with the passage before I jump to answers that maybe commentators or other sources have to give.
Yeah. Before we jump to the next step or even move forward, we could do a high level of the entire workflow. I think would be helpful. But also, I
Yeah,
wanted to ask if you could point out, like, some people might say, well, I've dropped the answers into these questions, and then, like, one, where do they go? And two, will I ever see them again?
yeah.
Like, if you're not familiar with workflows, like, what happens with your answers here? Yeah.
So, like, so here's where I typed in. So, based on your study, you answer what historical truth, and I explain what those things are, historical truths, and I give an example, and I explain all these things along the way, so that all that information is there, like the language that I'm using here. But these are all embedded into notes. So, basically, the notes feature is where Logos has built this in. Uh, but there's a lot happening in notes. I got types and
Hmm.
figures, and to be quite honest, my eyes still glaze over sometimes when I try to work inside of notes because they have so much going on. But you can see here's where the my notes show up. So when you go to the menus and you can pull up where's my notes on these passages, all of these, every one of these boxes creates a different note. Every one of these boxes on the guide creates a different note. And so you can see where I've started to type in these answers, right? They're all right here. So you can see when I click on each one, it brings up the note that I started writing. And notice that my note is titled 5 Day Sermon Planner, and then it gives the Genesis. So
Hmm.
later on, if you want to just go and look at your notes, like I said, to print it out, this is where you'd go. You can just print out this notes and you can just see where, and then print that out and look at it.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, all of those are linked right back to that workflow that you were working on, and that's Even the title
Exactly.
of the folder that they're all in there, so or the
Exactly.
notebook.
Yeah, it's so convenient. But this again takes a lot of that clutter out of the way, which is why I like the guides when you're doing this kind of workflow thing,
Hmm.
because a lot of the bells and whistles and making it bold and stuff. Now I will go in sometimes later in my notes and I'll do some editing right in there and I'll add, stuff to it, but it's just not necessary at this point. So let me just do continue here. So yeah, if you want me to get the big view here. So day one, you talk about the overview like each day?
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
think that a big higher level overview would be really
Okay.
cool to see where you take people in this workflow.
Okay. So that's more of day one. So actually, that's all of day one, really.
Hmm.
Everything I just did, that's your entire day one is observation of the text and trying to figure out what's the meaning of the text. Day two is exposition, and I'll zoom in here. I'm assuming that's zooming in for you.
There you go. It's nice.
So day two is exposition. So you're going to explore parallel passages. You're going to explore exegetical specific commentaries. And then you're going to find sort of these timeless truths. And if you're familiar with Haddon Robinson and Don Sanukian and their approach, these make sense. And then you're going to create a timeless outline. So by day two, you're going to have an outline of the passage. And I define what timeless is in here. We can look at that as we go if you want. It's up to you where you want to dive in. But again, I'll just stick with the overview. Day three is application. So in application, you're going to explore your expository commentaries. These are the ones that are trying to draw out the significance and the deep meanings of whatever's happening in these. I actually build in a group study. So when I was doing church planting, I had I'm a teams approach guy. But even if you don't have a team of people to approach, what I built in was a sort of a midweek. Hey, let's get together on Wednesday. So day one is Monday, day two is Tuesday, day three is Wednesday in the ideal world. And so day three, I'm like, hey, I've got 3 or 4 people that are my sermon prep companions, and they're all going through this process. Even if they're not going to be teaching it, they're going through it. And we get together and we say, okay, what's God been teaching us so far? What is the big highlights that you've been pulling out? So
Wow.
I do think that's actually a big part of it, and you'll see, we can dig in more about that. And then finding your applied truths. In other words, how does this truth that comes out in the text, how does it then apply to our contemporary context? So you're going to try to find historic meaning. The timeless truth is what is the overriding principle that God, this divine sort of meaning outside of even the context of ancient Near East civilizations or the New Testament church. Those are those
Yeah.
timeless. Now we're going to apply those truths to our current context, which I really try to reinforce to like the context of the life of your church, not just like a generic Western context or something like that, but really the life of your church. And then day four is illustration. That's the day you're just going to think about how do I make this make sense to people, or what ideas do I want to illustrate. Day five is confrontation and conversation, which is fun. The confrontation. The whole goal is how do I let the text confront me? Like what is
Hmm.
God convicting me in my life? One of my biggest sort of annoyances with even the way homiletics preaching is taught is like, hey, you do your sermon prep, but you still need to have your private devotional life. And those are two different worlds. I think that if you're doing your sermon prep that way, I'll be honest, I think it's wrong. I think the whole point of sermon prep is that this is my devotional life. This is my life where God convicts me of what is good in my life. He convicts me and he confronts me with what needs to be better in my life. And I should be just as convicted from preparing and preaching this sermon as the audience is and hearing this sermon, and convicted by the Holy Spirit of what does it mean to walk in holiness after God. And so and all along the way, and each day you're developing different outlines of different sermon, then eventually you're into sermon outline, and then you're in your final outline, and there's all that breaks down. But that's the overview of what we do in this. You're planning for clarity. You're going to do your sermon outline here, and again, then you compare. Then this is the only place. This is actually your very last step is where you look at some commentaries, maybe of some other homiletical commentaries where somebody's preached this
Okay.
message. But you
Yeah.
don't do that until you've actually done the entire thing.
Yeah. So
Never
the
do that
commentary
before that.
work that was done up to this point would be exegetical or
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
exegetical or expository commentaries. They give you
Awesome.
background information, context that otherwise we wouldn't maybe know. But there's no application type. commentaries or sermon type commentaries or articles
Hmm.
at all until after you've actually done your whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've a couple questions. One is there's a lot in this, but what if someone said like I wanted like I think I could see this being useful, but I would love to add my own. They can edit this, right? Or tweak it.
So I think you can create your Logos is pretty powerful on these guides. You can create your own guides. They have pre ones built in. Uh, there's other people. There's I think dozens and dozens. Last I
Yeah.
looked, the people that have built in their own things that they use and they've just made publicly available. And it's pretty easy. I'm fairly tech savvy, but I mean I feel like it's pretty easy to kind of
Yeah.
build your own. Or if this doesn't work, like I said, there's days there's when you pick a certain passage, I skip different sections
Sure.
because it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. Some
Yeah.
days just don't make sense for certain things, and I'll skip it. It, yeah.
Another question was on like I don't know when you had pieced this together. Is there anything you would add, or is there anything that you say, I wish I would have added this to the workflow?
No, I actually just redid when I committed to come on and do this with you. I'm like,
Great.
oh man, I got to look at this and really kind of from the aspect of a user. And I updated all the links to the current sermon stuff. They used to link to my old blog that I took down. And my blog is still morethancake.org, and it points to my Substack. But because I was getting sort of my search engines were getting suppressing some of my stuff because of my writing on biblical marriage and certain moral issues. A lot of my stuff got suppressed, so I switched away from that. It points to my Substack, but it doesn't
Okay.
link directly to it. I'm trying to
Yeah.
circumvent the silencing of the big tech. I had to redo all my links, so I just did that 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
This stuff is pretty solid.
That's great.
Again, because I'm building on the shoulders of some giants, with Had Robinson and Don Sanukian, and so because of that, I think it's a pretty it's held up. Yeah.
Can I ask another question? And I'm just thinking about this on the fly. I don't know how up to I don't know knowledge you are with the subscription model now. Is there
hmm
a subscription tier or a library that you'd suggest someone would add that's associated with this sort of sermon
Yeah.
prep?
So for pastors, I don't even know what the subscription models are anymore. I just have my base package from years ago, and partly I just don't need to update because I mean, like I said, I'm doing my Logos humble brag here. I've got in my library, let's see what my, let's see, so I've got 10,758 sources in my library. So I
And you
have
have the
not
right
need,
sort, and you have the resources you need,
yeah,
essentially.
so I've
Yeah,
got what
to
I
walk through
need.
this. Yeah.
So I don't need to do that. So I really honestly don't know, but I'm pretty sure with any of the base packages, all of these features are well, most of them used to be available, I know, in silver package. Well, I don't even know what that translates to anymore. So, yeah, somebody wiser than me will have to, that's kept up with that side of Logos, will have to keep
Yeah.
abreast of that.
Well, you've got everything you need with the library that you have, though, and
Yeah,
so that's great to
yeah.
know. And
And
then
that's one of the
others who
tricks.
use the workflow.
Yeah, and that's one of the
Yeah.
tricks. And I know you have some videos on this. Like, so Logos, where I say you're going to use exegetical commentaries. All you have to do, you don't even need a lot. Like I have way too many, more than I ever use, right? But when you go into your library and tag books, and you have some videos on this that show people how to do it, that's what sort of, you can build into this commentaries that are compatible here.
Yeah.
So this will pull in the relevant commentaries as you go through. So it only takes a little tiny bit of tagging on these commentaries to work. And then what that does is it filters out all the stuff you don't need and gives you only what you need. And I would say that even starting at like the mid-level stuff that they have, at least in terms of how they used to organize packages, say when they'd say like the pastors package, or I don't know how they
Mm-hmm.
label them anymore, but it used to be like the silver package was pretty decent. You'll get three or four solid commentaries at both the expository, the exegetical, and the homiletical levels, and that might be all you need, and you'll be
Yeah.
fine. Although I would recommend this if you don't have Hooray Homiletike, one of the best exegetical commentaries. It was
I'm
always one of
making a
my
note
go-to
right
commentaries.
now.
So, um, but that's just a side note.
Awesome. Well, that's incredibly helpful. Like the entire workflow is helpful in how you've done the work for so many, and you've linked to additional context and teaching on how to make the most of it. So all of this is really helpful. Is there anything before we wrap up? Is there anything that you feel you'd add?
Yeah, so like I said, this is just you've seen the outline, you saw me step through day one, you saw how the resources is. I just would encourage people, don't be sort of discouraged. I'll go ahead and stop sharing that since it's
Hmm.
not relevant anymore. Don't be discouraged by the overwhelming feature sets of Logos. Even if you need to call in and say, "Hey, I've got this guide that I want to do for sermon prep." The sales folks there, they'll help you figure out which baseline package would get you exegetical, expository, and homiletical commentaries. Say, I just need a few of each, right? I'm busy, can't afford a lot, whatever it is. They can give you the baseline, which some of those sermon prep tools are available in. So they'll help you figure that out. Once you do, you can download this for free. But just don't let the overwhelming nature of the feature set in Logos keep you from digging into something like this sermon, the 5 days to better sermon prep guide, because I really did build it with busy pastors in mind because I had to redo my entire workflow the way I lived my life when I was bivocational church planter because nothing worked the way I used to do sermon prep when I was just full time. And so if you're just starting out, you feel, oh, I'll never be the guy who's got all these hours. You can do it. You really can. So please don't let that. And, Jason, you're doing great work here. And so, you're helping people is all I'm
Thanks, Joe.
saying. And so you're keeping people more up to date than I am on the latest stuff. So it's all doable for people. So
Yeah.
that's where I
And if
land.
if there are any questions for Joe or myself and on this video, drop them in the comments. Reach out to Logos. If they don't get back to you, I'll try to help out. No big deal. But I'm also
Yeah.
going to add the link to the Substack. I'm going to see if I could share a link to the workflow. So I'll see what I can get for that
I
too.
have it linked. I think in the Substack that you link it to, by the way,
Yeah.
I do have a link to where you can download it directly. I just don't know how well that works anymore. But inside Logos, when you search, I think it's actually faster that way.
Yeah.
It used to be a little bit more of a kludge, but they've really improved it. So I
Cool.
think
Well, we'll
looking
get
inside of Logos might be better.
get everybody set up. I think it's under the shared doc, so
Yeah.
we can get to that. If you have any questions around accessing the workflow, just drop a comment on this video, and I'll make sure that you find your way there. But Joe, you're busy. Appreciate your time. Really appreciate all the resourcing you've done for Logos users and pastors more specifically. So I really, really appreciate that and the work that you're doing right now as well in preparing future pastors, super pastors, future
Yeah. Well,
pastors is the
super
word that I
pastors
meant.
too. Yeah. Uber
Super
pastors.
pastors.
Hey, real quick, one last thing I should tell the
Yeah,
folks.
of course.
I do have like I think it's a couple hour training or an hour 45
Yeah.
training on this whole thing. It's on that link that Jason's going to link to. That part is for paid subscribers, as our comments on my site. They're only for paid subscribers. But quite frankly, you can sign up for 1 month, $5, watch the training for $5, and then you can unsubscribe. You can go back to a free subscription. Stay subscribed, but you can go back to free level if you want. I used to charge a lot more to do the training, but I haven't kept it up, so I don't want to charge huge amounts. But I do at least, all that say, if you do sign up and if you do pay for that, the comment section I'm available for. So if you're paying for me for that, I will
So
respond to
cool.
questions there as well. So I will do my best to help you with that.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for calling that out before we wrap up. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate your time. And anybody who's watching the replay right now, there are a whole lot of other interviews. I think we're up to 15 or 16 or so now. Much more to wade through and learn about the application. And if you appreciate the time here, make sure you comment, let Joe know. I really appreciate you being here, Joe. So, be blessed, and I will catch you on the interwebs and Substack and all the other places where Logos folks convene. So thanks so much, Joe.
Thanks. God bless.